Hello everyone, my name is Russ Sabella. I'm currently president of the Florida School Counselor Association. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Alwyn Lamp, who's a school counselor at Christa McAuliffe Middle School, and who will be presenting our webinar for today. The air date for this webinar is February 27th, 2013, and the format will be that you will be able to listen to her through your computer. And we are going to monitor the questions area of the webinar, and so if you have questions, please type those out in the questions area on your computer. So we will go until 5 o'clock, or you can ask questions in the last 10 minutes. We'll stop and see if there are any other questions that you might have. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll be given the link to the recording as soon as it's available, probably in the next week or two. So, Alwyn Lamp, I'm handing it over to you.
Thanks, Russ. I appreciate it. And I love the fact that we can all be comfortable either in our homes or our workplaces if people are still at work and still be able to participate in some training. And I appreciate everyone taking a moment to listen to the information that I have to share. This presentation was developed by the Upside Down organization, which is a company in Baltimore, Maryland, and it is particularly, they do applied research, they use neuroscience, it's a non-profit organization, and they use the money that they earn through presentations to help kids and pass on the information about how brain science can help the process of working with children more effectively. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the Upside Down organization. But who am I? Well, I think it helps to have a face put to a name, and those two young ladies that you see on the right-hand side are my daughters, who are probably my greatest qualification for what I do, but you see my photo over there on the left. So I like to let you know a little bit about who I am. I know I'm a person who likes to know where an accent comes from. The accent is Australian with a little bit of English in there from a couple of years in England as a teenager. I'm a middle school counselor at Christa McAuliffe Middle School in Boynton Beach. I'm a member of both FSCA and our local counseling association, the Palm Beach School Counseling Association. As I said, I'm a certified presenter with the Upside Down organization, and I became interested in the whole, brain stuff because I was a former science teacher. So when it started coming out in magazines and things like that, I went, oh, I recognize those words. And so my science background gave me a bit of an opportunity to be able to start to grasp it. And I'm sort of proud of my former experience as an outward bound instructor, where I would spend quite long periods of time out in the woods, so I had a nice adventurous background. So that gives you a little bit of idea of who I am, and perhaps we've run into each other at previous times in conferences and things like that. I do have a lot of information to present for you this afternoon, so I hope that sort of rushing through is not our experience. I know that Russ would like us to leave about 10 minutes at the end, and we've got quite a bit to do. But the first thing is, well, what's the point of learning about the brain? And I think that, understanding that the students that we work with and their adults and our own reactions to them contain a lot of biological processes. And as I've started to work with this and understand it, I can identify, those biological processes within myself, and it really helps me manage myself better, and in turn I'm able to share some of that with my students. And also by understanding how the brain works, it can give us more effective strategies to improve learning and solve some of the problems that we face in our schools. And, number 3, in the United States, our schools are struggling. I suspect it's not just in the United States. But by looking at neuroscience, we can try and look at those issues in more effective ways and try and come up with new approaches. And some of the brain research has provided those opportunities. we're going to start off by looking at some basic brain anatomy, and then we're going to go and look at 4 particularly important processes that occur during the teen years, and then finally I'm going to give you 7 strategies that some of which you probably already use, but if you're not using them, you will be able to start, and if you are using them already, hopefully you'll understand from the point of view of the brain why they might be effective. So the basic brain things that we're going to look at are 4 structures. One of them is called the hippocampus, which we look at as being the equivalent to a mail carrier, and that will become clear in a moment. Another one is the part of the brain that is constantly scanning the environment, which is called the amygdala. The cerebellum is important for movement, and the frontal lobes are really the target that the school system is trying to get to, and that is the uniquely human part of the brain. And we consider that to be like, you know, the driver, the part of the brain that's sort of managing everything. So looking at the hippocampus, you can see that on the slide, that big blue thing at the bottom that says hippocampus, and you can see where that's pointing to. The hippocampus is in a central part of the brain, which is considered to be the limbic system. And the hippocampus is really important from the point of view of memory. It's crucial to memory. And all short-term memory processing occurs in the hippocampus. The hippocampus is neutral. It doesn't decide what it's going to remember. There are other brain structures that determine what you remember and what you don't. The word hippocampus stands for seahorse, and it is shaped, and there's the next slide I think gives you a better idea of what it's shaped like. Oh, hang on, let's go down. Yes, you can see that flashing light there. That's the hippocampus, and I'll leave that on there flashing for a while so that that sort of gets into your brain. It's shaped like the seahorse, and it's where memory is dropped in the short term. That's why we consider it to be equivalent somewhat to a mail carrier. The mail carrier doesn't keep the stuff that it's delivering, and in this case the memory. The mail carrier handles it for a moment, gets it sorted out, tracks where it's going to go, and then passes it on. And that's what the hippocampus does. It's like it gets a tracking label and gets delivered and stored. The memory gets stored in other parts of the brain if it's determined that it's important enough. We need to forget a lot of what we experience and learn. If we hang on to too much of it, it becomes paralyzing. So for example, we might not remember what we had for dinner a week ago, but we might remember what we had for dinner last night. And we remember important emotional memories. And this part of the brain, the short-term memory, will only store memories for about 3 days. One of the things about the hippocampus is it is very much affected by stress. So when people are in that stress mode and can't remember things that they might have known even 10, 20 minutes ago, I know I'll go into a stress response where all of a sudden I can't remember important things. It's because of the impact of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, on the hippocampus, and it stops the retrieval of memories. Long-term exposure to cortisol also will destroy cells within the hippocampus, so this structure is very important when it comes to the processing of memories and the impact of stress on the area. It's also very important to have enough sleep, that the whole process of memory is affected by sleep, and we'll look at that a little bit later. The next structure we're going to look at is the amygdala, and again in this slide you can see it down to the left-hand side, the thing pointing into the amygdala. The way I teach this to my students, and while you're sitting at home, if you put your fingers, take your index finger, and if you put them on either side of your temple, and picture yourself moving inside about an inch. That's where your amygdala is located. We have one on either side, and it constantly scans the environment. So we consider it to be like the palace guard. I think of it as sort of, you know, the guard standing at the top of the watchtower looking down around, scanning the environment to see what is out there that might injure us. With teenagers, the amygdala is the default mode. They automatically revert to the amygdala when they sense stress. And that stress may not be a physical stressor, as you all, I'm sure, witness in your everyday work life. The stressors can be social, emotional, as well as physical. And so the amygdala is activated when anything that could be a possible threat is detected. And the ability to use the frontal lobes at that point, which is the thinking part of the brain, becomes shut down, and the impulsive, reactive processes of self-preservation, fight, flight, and freeze go into impact when the amygdala is activated. It's a really important brain center, however. Sometimes it's easy to sort of say, well, let's stop the amygdala working. Well, it protects people and helps them stay alive. If people don't have an amygdala, they're highly likely to take very great risks, and it provides the gift of fear, without which people may do things that end up causing them to die. The amygdala, as I said, with teenagers, is a cause of them misinterpreting adult emotions. So with teenagers, the faces that you see here would immediately throw them into a fight, flight, or freeze response. And a lot of times it's their reactions to the amygdala mode that freaks parents out. And we may be asking, what were you thinking? But in fact, the question really that is probably more pertinent is, what were you feeling? Because with the amygdala being the default mode, they really aren't thinking, they are feeling. And we'll go into the frontal lobes in a moment, because it is the frontal lobes that mediate the reactions of the amygdala, and in teenagers those are not yet developed enough for them to be able to utilize them effectively, which is a big part of middle school drama that, if you're middle school people, you are very familiar with. The next structure that I think is important for us to look at is the cerebellum, and you see that there on the right-hand side. It's part of the very much more primitive reptilian brain. It's active when children are born, and it governs motion and is developed through motion. There are functions that we're discovering in that the cerebellum does. They even think it has something to do with memory, but people are still trying to sort out exactly what the cerebellum does, other than governing and being very involved in movement. But it is the key structure that helps people learn balance, helps people, learn to be coordinated and to move effectively. One of the things that is really important to know about the cerebellum, I think, is that it is developed through movement, which is one of the reasons that exercise is so important. And it is also the second to last brain structure to develop. So once the cerebellum is finished developing, it actually triggers the frontal lobe to really sort of go into gear to finish up its development. So if children are sitting around not moving, then their cerebellum is not developing, and that slows down the development of their frontal lobes. So it underlies for us again the crucial role of exercise in neurological development. And the structure that the key to what the school system is trying to accomplish is probably the frontal lobes, as well as being the uniquely human part of our brain. It is the part of our brain I sort of think of going in, if I could go in under my eyeballs and sort of stick my fingers up into the part of my brain that juts over my forehead, that would be the frontal lobes. The brain develops from like the back. You see that brain stem that goes down to the right-hand side. It develops in order from the back of the brain towards the front of the brain, with the exception of the cerebellum. So the frontal lobe is the last structure to develop. It is, as I said, not fully developed in teenagers. It is certainly active in children. It's barely functional when a child is first born, but through the years of childhood, it comes into stronger and stronger mode. But it doesn't finish developing fully until people are 24 or 25. So it is something that is key to good functioning as a human being. It is like the driver. It manages the reactions of the amygdala. In order to drive well, one needs to have judgment. One needs to anticipate what's going to happen, to have insight, to have the ability to assess what's going on within oneself, and to be able to make decisions and exercise judgment. And that's what the frontal lobes allows people to do. It is the source of many functions: impulse control, attention are located in the frontal lobe. The ability to organize oneself, to think ahead and plan actions are located in the frontal lobes. Effective time orientation, anticipating how long tasks are going to take and being able to figure out how much time is passing, is located in the frontal lobes. Reading social cues, predicting consequences, and setting and achieving goals. So when students have fully functioning frontal lobes, they can do these things. Because that doesn't occur completely until they're a young adult, that's why it's so important for us to lend them our frontal lobes. One of the speakers in the Upside Down organization that I learned from, Frank Cross, says that if you don't have a frontal lobe, it's a good idea to hang out with someone who does. And that's the importance of the attuned adults in the life of students. And I use the word attuned because sometimes adults are physically present, but it's also important for them to be emotionally present and aware of what's going on. In addition to the brain structures, there are some other neurochemical things taking place, and there are some neurotransmitters that I'm not going to go into detail, but I want you to be aware that all of the processes that are occurring in these structures are also being impacted by chemical experiences as well. The quote, the name of the workshop, Giving a Fish a Bath, comes from this lady who was a teacher for 37 years in Nebraska. She taught 9th grade, and this is the quote that says, "Teaching, guiding, and influencing teens is like giving a fish a bath. Teens will often see your efforts as unnecessary, burdensome, and unwanted, but in the end they will remember the energy, enthusiasm, and fun that you put into bath time." I like that idea that so often our efforts are not appreciated. They think they don't need our services, but once they grow into their frontal lobes, they start to realize that maybe it was making a difference in their lives. I mentioned the brain development occurring from back to front, but it is not an even process. It doesn't take place methodically, and there are vulnerable periods that occur during the process of brain development. People have known for some time about the ages 0 through 5 as being a particularly important time for brain development and person and people development, but we now recognize that 12 to 18 is also a second very vulnerable period of time for development. And I hope that at some point the support structures that become available to students during that age group reflect this understanding. As growth takes place, the structures in the brain that change are not only, in fact, the cell size changes. We are born with many more neurons, the basic brain cell, than we will ever have else, at any other time in our life. But the size of the cells change. There are a number of different chemical growth factors that come into play at different times as people's brains develop. The critical change that occurs as children develop is the connectivity between the different brain cells. That's what learning basically is that when one has that aha moment, the connection between two brain cells, two neurons, has gone into place, and that type of connectivity becomes a physical change. I say to my kids, when you leave school, we want your brain to be different than when you came in each day. Neurogenesis is also a process by which new brain cells are being developed all the time. The survival of those new cells is also something that is important. Neural mapping, the brain cells become organized into certain patterns of connected ideas which stay connected to each other through the synapses. So that's what they call neural mapping. Different chemical levels, neurotransmitter levels are changing, especially affected by the hormones through adolescence. The distribution of activity within the brain can change. And not only gene expression, but environmental factors influence brain development, and the blood flow changes. So there's lots and lots of things that are going on as the brains grow. Teens in particular are very vulnerable to stress. The amygdala is more easily activated than ours is as adults. They have greater sensitivity to rewards, but are less aware of what's going on around them, more likely to be in tune to what's going on internally, but not to what's happening around them. They don't interpret emotions accurately, especially adult emotions, and they have a fuzzy brain that can sometimes cause them to run into dangerous situations, and they're poor at orienting themselves to the future. I did an activity the other day where I was asking them to define their goals, and they were very unable to articulate their purpose and their goals beyond high school. So their future orientation, as I'm sure you are aware, is poor, and that's one way in which we can help them. As the teenagers' brains develop, there are 4 particular processes that occur that are vital to the behaviors that we see, especially in the middle school years. And those 4 processes are called blossoming, which also occurred at the age of 2, pruning, which has been happening since they were born, myelination, which lays down a fatty layer along the sides of the neuron, the axon, and the hormonal development. You can see on the left a picture of a neuron. This is a basic brain cell, and you can see those sort of finger-like structures out of the top left, which are the dendrites. The cell body, you see it looks like a big eye in the middle of it, but that would be the nucleus. The snaky type thing that you see there on the right is the axon, and those little cushions that you see laying around the axon, that's what is called myelination, and that is fatty tissue that is laid down. neurons are actually pretty leaky, and the neurotransmitters will, or the electrical impulse will leak out. And so each time a neuron is used, a little bit of fatty tissue is laid down around it in order to insulate it, much like an electric wire, so that those impulses don't leak out of the cell. And that's a very important process in the teen years. And then you see those fingers at the bottom are called the terminal. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the synapse, but that's a really important area between the different cells. The terminals from one neuron connect to the dendrites of the other. This is one thing that I use in my office. In fact, this came out of my office, is I have created some simple models of adult neurons. And you can see it's just a little piece of sort of floppy foam, very thin foam, punched a couple of holes in it, put some pipe cleaners in there. The white pipe cleaners represent the dendrites. The red pipe cleaner represents the axons, and the plastic fork at the bottom is supposed to be the terminal. I'll share this with parents, and I'll say, this is what, you know, a very simplified neuron might look like for an adult. There are actually thousands of synapses, so there's clearly many more dendrites. But when this blossoming process takes place, there is an enormous growth in the number of dendrites. The blossoming occurs twice in a lifetime, as I said, at around 2 years old, and then again at the age of 13. And it creates so much possibility for different neuronal synaptic pathways that you could call it the million-way map, because there are millions of different possibilities for people to figure out how they can do something. So that's why a 2-year-old starts to say, no, I'm not going to do it that way because I can see this way to do it. And that's why we get that same behavior in teenagers, that there are possible neural pathways that they can see that we have probably pruned away. And this is also what leads to the parental response of what were you thinking? And as we discussed earlier, they were probably not thinking, they were feeling, but they have so many neuronal possibilities of pathways that they could choose that have been pruned out of our brains. And so then I show the parents, after I've shown them that previous slide, this is the similar model of a teen neuron. And instead of putting 2 holes in the top of the, what's it called? I want to call it felt, but it's not. It's that foam. I punched 20 holes because for every dendrite that an adult brain has, teenagers have 10 more dendrites. The neurons, the dendrites that are used become reinforced with myelin, and so they become more efficient and become used more easily, whereas the ones that are not used become pruned away by other cells. And so parents, when they see these 2 neurons that I share with them, can start to understand the complexities that are going on in the brains of their children, and it sort of helps them realize that some of the behaviors that they're seeing are not extraordinary, but that are part of the brain development. As I said, when the after the blossoming occurs, the pruning process is developmentally really important. Use it or lose it. The neural pathways that are used are reinforced through myelin. The ones that are not used become pruned away. And that's why this is such a developmentally crucial time for teenagers. The ability for adults to be able to reinforce the behaviors that are going to be functional and useful for them and extinguish those that are not is vital to successful transition through this. It presents windows of opportunity. It's where teenagers may be interested in all sorts of exotic, save the world, hypocrisy, sports, hobbies, exploration, and this is where addiction becomes such a critical thing, because the windows of sensitivity make it much more likely for teenagers of this age to become addicted because of those neurons become reinforced rather than pruned. So exposure to alcohol and drugs at this time of life makes it much more likely that they may become addicted later in life. The importance of delaying use. As I have mentioned, in addition to the blossoming, the creation of multiple dendrites, the pruning away the ones that are not used, the neurons that are used, the axons become covered with a layer of fatty tissue, which is called myelination. And neurons that wire together, fire together, so strong emotional experiences can cause neurons that might otherwise be unrelated to fire together, and that can result in traumatic types of connections. It can also result in positive connections where positive associations become connected because of the common wiring. And I've already mentioned the addiction risks and the window sensitivity for that because of the process of myelination. If behaviors that lead to using are being myelinated, then it's much more likely to lead to addiction as an adult. This slide shows brain scans of the development, and the gray matter is the myelinated neurons, and you can see that as they reach ages 20, from 15 to 20, most of the myelination takes place. Prior to that, there's not a lot of blue areas, so the neurons are not myelinated. And 80% of the process of protecting those pathways that are used occurs between 15 and the 20s. I'm not going to mention very much about the hormones. It brings in another layer of complexity, but I hope that I've demonstrated through the previous slides. We used to say the teenage years were all about the hormones. They're also an awful lot about brain development. Now I want to give you 7 strategies that are suggested by the Upside Down organization for being helpful to children at this age to help them negotiate this critical period of time. And those 7 strategies are, first of all, to teach the teenagers about their brains, to help the adults remember, teachers, parents, and ourselves, that it's not personal. Their behaviors are not about us. It's about adolescents. The importance of sense and meaning for teenagers to decide what they're going to learn. To interact with them with brain-friendly language, the tremendous importance of empathy and communication for them in their development. The Make It Real, the survival game, is the process of helping us to remember what it was like to be a teenager and the difficulties of the situations they're sometimes faced with, and they're trying to do that with their amygdala rather than their frontal lobes. And then number 7, some fundamentals that we'll cover that we don't want to forget about. So what are the things that we can do to teach students about their brains? I do use some slides, PowerPoint slides, to show them some basic brain structure and help them understand the role of the amygdala and the value of their frontal lobes in problem solving. We use a program at our school, which I'll share with you in a moment, to teach them how to care for the brain, and that particular program also helps them how to think better. A lot of our work as counselors, certainly is trying to help them think and problem solve better. And I've found that being able to use my understanding of the brain and share that with them has sometimes been helpful to them in understanding why this time of life is so confusing for them. The program that we use to teach them about their brains is called Brainology. It's developed by a scientist called Carol Dweck, and I'll go into her work a little bit later, but it's 4 hours, a little bit more, 5 hours of computer-based work, and they learn some fundamental things, the things that I've just shared with you about the brain. They learn much of that. They learn about neurons, and they learn that as they exercise their brain, they actually can impact their intelligence, which helps them to be more motivated and to be willing to struggle through challenges. The last session also gives them a great deal of brain-friendly study strategies and approaches to work, and there's a lot of support material that's provided beyond the computer program for teachers to reinforce the concepts that are taught. The idea that it's not personal, that it's adolescent, helps adults to recognize that this is a time of life that is developmentally quite different, and the brains that we're dealing with are quite different from the ones that we are experiencing life out of. And when teachers can understand that the students are reacting out of their amygdala, they're reacting emotionally instead of logically, then it can help them hopefully step out of the battle with them in order to allow them that space and guide them into lending the teacher's frontal lobes to get them to mediate their emotional reactions. They many times can't articulate what their emotions are, so they don't have the words to share them. They're very vulnerable to stress, and as I'm sure that you know from your experiences in the schools, a lot of times they take actions where they don't anticipate the consequences. Sharing some of the brain stuff with the parents can help them not step out of what I call the ballistic mode, and it can help the teachers as well to recognize that they're functioning out of their amygdala rather than their frontal lobes. It also helps to share with the parents and the teachers that those brains that have that blossoming overcomplicate things and result in the drama that can run their lives. They respond to everything with much bigger emotions than we do. And they're not accurate in the way they read adult faces. The amygdala does not, in teenagers, that we might be speaking in a way that we consider to be firm, but they think that it is that we're yelling at them, and they don't interpret body language accurately. So, you know, that can lead to the slamming doors and the types of things that can go on in households that are distressing to adults. The third strategy is to really emphasize the importance of sense and meaning to teenagers. There is another part of the brain that says, what's in it for me? And if they can't figure out what's in it for them, it's terribly difficult for them to make the effort to learn something if they don't know why they have to learn it. It's recommended, you know, to parents, well, when you're asking your child to do something, really dig into the strategy of helping the child understand why they need to do it and to develop a sense of why it means something to them. The things that are remembered are if something has survival value, then maybe they'll grasp onto that and recognize, yes, they want to survive, and so that would be something that they would remember. But also to try and help them grasp it, and this is important for curriculum too, to help them know what makes sense and what has meaning to them. And so I know that teachers are getting more creative with this type of thing, but for parents to also understand that, you know, do this because I say so, usually is not effective, that there'll be more effective engagement with the material if they can figure out the sense of why they have to learn it and what has meaning to them, connecting it to things that they're interested in. And trying to get new material to relate to what teens already know and help them to see how they might use this in the future. When those things are done, then it becomes much easier for teenagers to go to the effort of learning. The language of the brain, the way that we say things, is really important in influencing how students respond. And the research that was done by Dr. Carol Dweck, who created Brainology, wrote a book called Mindset, based out of research in which she would give students difficult math problems. She found that there were some students who would be willing to struggle with the problems, and so she started investigating what it was that they were willing to do. And one of the things that she discovered through her research is that when you tell teens that they're smart, she'd spent 3 decades of research showing that telling students that they're smart would fit them into a box where they would say, because I'm struggling, I've run out of the amount of smartness that I have, and they shut down. Whereas if you focus on effort instead, rather than intelligence or ability, then that makes children much more resilient and is a key to success in school and life. So an overemphasis on the part of the adults on intellect or talent and leading children to believe that those things are innate or fixed leaves people more vulnerable to failure, not willing to meet challenges, and unmotivated to learn. She broke this down into 2 mindsets. She called one of them the fixed mindset, that idea that you have a certain amount of smartness, and when you run out of it, or a certain amount of talent, and when you run out of it, you're done. That's what she called a fixed mindset, and that would then when you're struggling, the child interprets that to mean that I don't have the ability to do it. If I have to struggle or work hard, I'm dumb. And the students that were willing to do the difficult math problems were the ones that did not view intelligence this way. The ones that were willing to struggle with the more difficult work had what she describes as a growth mindset, in which intelligence is viewed as something that's malleable, that can be developed. And so the little logo for the Brainology is the little brain with the dumbbells, which is showing the students that with effort and use, you build the strength and the density of the connections between your neurons. And when people are making mistakes, students that have a growth mindset recognize that the mistake is not due to any lack of inherent ability, but is the strategies that they were using were not effective, or that they did not make enough effort. And I use this concept when I check on progress and grades with students on a regular basis, and we're always talking about, one student came to me today and said, oh, I got a D in such and such. Well, which was for her is good news, by the way. So what did you do to make that happen? Not having it be an accident of fate. And she was able to recognize what she had done and felt the benefit of it. The way that we can promote a growth mindset is the way that adults praise children, to praise them for their effort and persistence. Telling a child that they're smart can shut them down. Sharing success stories that emphasize people who have experienced failure and people who are driven by a love of work and a love of learning and hard work. And then teaching them about the brain and how it responds to learning. Here's some examples of praise strategies that are effective. I like the way you tried a lot of different strategies on that math problem until you finally got it. Rather than saying, oh, you did such a good job of that because you're so smart. Or that was a hard English assignment, but you stuck with it until you got it done. You stayed at your desk and kept your concentration. That's great. And then let's talk about what we struggled with today and learn from it. I'll go first. So those are some examples of the type of praise to use. Number 5, teaching empathy and building strong communication skills. As counselors, I think we do a particularly good job of that, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this section. But I do want you to see an expert's opinion on communication in teens. So here you see a ZITS. This is unspoken communication from between guys. They say hi to each other. this is what they mean. When we look at girls' communication, this is what we mean. So here's a light interpretation of the complexity of social skills and communication in boys and girls. But in a more serious note, social factors obviously do affect how children feel about being in school, and knowing that the feelings are supreme for them, then it is really important. The culture of the school is really important at establishing the neurotransmitters that they're going to create. The types of things that we use at our school, which I'm sure many of you do: positive behavior support, providing groups for them to be able to work on these types of things, providing peer mediation to help with conflict, student ambassador programs to deal with conflict. Those are all things that help mediate the social conditions of the school. Teenagers very sensitive to stress levels. Their ability to think becomes affected by their stress levels. The status is as crucial to them as, if their status is being threatened, then that's about the same as being punched in the face almost. Their immune system is affected by the social conditions and their self-concept. And chronic exposure to negative social conditions, as I said, can impact their ability to remember and learn. And that's because, oh dear, my PowerPoint has just stopped working. I hope that you don't see that. I hope that we don't crash here. We just did. I'm sorry. Let me come back up.
Well, let's see. Alwyn, as you're recovering from your PowerPoint.
Did we lose everything, Russ?
No, well, no, we can keep going. Just go ahead and open that up again. We've actually only have about 5 minutes before we check in for questions. But
I know we do.
Yeah, this could be a good time to check in. If anybody has any questions at this point, let's go ahead and have you write them in the questions section of the webinar platform. Let's see. Looks like you may have crashed, Alwyn.
The wrong thing. I'm afraid. Let me see.
We can see your email.
You can see my email, can you? Oh, you see my email there.
We're still watching your screen.
Are you?
Why don't you go ahead and try to open up PowerPoint one more time, and if not, we can start wrapping it up by just summarizing and seeing if there's any questions.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That happens.
Technology.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was going to the other things of the social situation. The next one, the survival game, is something that probably the counselors are familiar with, the type of rehearsing refusal skills and teaching students refusal skills. But I think the important thing here is recognizing how difficult it is that some of the situations that teens find themselves in can be so challenging that even with frontal lobes, if you put yourselves in that situation, it's really hard for us to come up with answers. And so for teenagers without rehearsal, I'm sorry, Russ, I have an old version of PowerPoint, so I've got to click through them all. I can't start the slide partway through. So the survival game is something that, as counselors, people are probably already doing these types of things. So I didn't want to spend a lot on that. And the last strategies, don't forget the fundamentals, are the importance of exercise. As I said, if that affects the development of the cerebellum, which triggers the frontal lobes, it creates new brain cells. That neurogenesis, the new brain cells, occurs because of exercise. They should exercise at least 30 minutes a day. Nutrition is, the other thing that exercise does is it creates a chemical called miraculous growth of the brain, which if they exercise before a particularly difficult class, it actually helps them do better in that particular class. It results in bigger frontal lobes, which again allows them to predict, judge, plan, and organize better. And it creates tremendously beneficial neurotransmitters for them, which help them feel a whole lot better. A lot of times with the anxious students, that's exactly what I do, is I get them out and get them moving so that we can, change their neurotransmitters. Nutrition is also essential for brain health. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. So junk foods don't help the brain process. It needs lean proteins, vitamins, minerals, fruits and vegetables. We know all this stuff already, but so I won't spend time on that. There's a list of some of the great brain foods. Blueberries are supposed to be one of the best. Lots of antioxidants that scrubs away plaque and helps brain health. And almonds and walnuts are also particularly good. And then the last one is how important sleep is to brain development, that they need 2.5 hours of sleep. Vital for memory. They believe that the memory is organized through sleep, and that the time that we spend asleep allows the hippocampus to be able to work with the rest of the brain to figure out where all of that new knowledge is going to be stored and how it's going to be able to be accessed. The way we organize school is really not beneficial to students. Some school systems are starting later out of acknowledgement for their sleep needs. And the last thing that, again, as counselors we probably have a pretty good idea of is the importance of stress management, because of the impact of stress and cortisol on the brain. And here's a list of things that are beneficial for lowering the hormone that's produced as a result of stress, the cortisol. And you can add to this list mastery, that when students feel mastery, their stress is lowered and it produces good neurochemicals. And then I just wanted to finish with some excellent books, some resources that I have read and that are particularly helpful at helping understand the teen brain. I know that people might have a chance to review this later, but I'd be happy to email this information to anyone. So I can't make the whole PowerPoint available other than what they'll be able to see on the website later, but I'm certainly happy to communicate any information about the books and the resources. And then finally some websites, and same thing, I can forward that to people if they email me. And there's my email address, and should anyone want to contact the Upside Down organization because they're interested in a presentation, there's the contact information. So Russ, do we have any questions there?
We don't have any questions, so let me just see one more time. If you do have questions, now would be the time to write those in under the questions dialog box. We'll give you another few seconds to do that. All right. Well, gosh, Alwyn, if you want to go ahead and finish up, anything else you want to tell us?
Okay. Well, you know that there's lots of stuff that I would have loved to have told you. But I think the main thing that I have found valuable with this, as I said, is being able to teach it to my students. And particularly with the children that might have anxieties, the ones that are having difficulty coming to school, I do use the modeling of the amygdala. I show them a cross-section of the brain, and I talk to them about the amygdala, and I let them know that this is the part of the brain that is active for you right now. And the part of the brain that we want to engage and get working to help you out is the frontal lobes. So I talk to them to sort of start that conversation in their brains to consider the amygdala like being a little puppy dog that's scared of the fireworks on July 4th. That there it is hiding under the bed, scared of these fireworks that are not actually going to hurt them. And so helping them to see that they can use one part of the brain to talk to another part of the brain to settle it down and soothe it down. And sometimes they get that and understand it and realize that what they are relying on as being important and real to them and meaningful is actually not, that it's a reaction from just one part of the brain.
Okay,
I also
that's
talked
wonderful.
about the brain being like a car. The brain being like a car, you can look inside it and see all these different parts. So, help them to understand that if one part is not working so well, then it helps to know what that part does and what to do instead.
Mm-hmm. Alwyn,
Okay.
we've got about 3 minutes. One question just came in. Are you collaborating with
Okay.
others in your school to assist students with understanding how their brain works?
Yes, I work with a teacher who does critical thinking, and she does the brainology, and I work with her on that. I've also collaborated with intensive reading teachers to do the same program, and we've also introduced we piloted another program called SMART program, which I, helped mediate through the intensive reading class, but with target mainly the intensive reading. The brainology at the moment we do with all our 7th graders.
Okay, very good. One more
And
question.
I also use a brain model through the test anxiety program that I do, which we target all 8th graders, and I do that through the science department. So again, that's collaborative.
Gotcha. Okay, one more question, and it looks like we're going to have to end or get kicked off. The question is, how does mindset research reflect on kids who've given up?
It's not necessarily something that can be a quick fix, because if they've already got into the shutdown mode, just telling them about mindset is not going to help much. I have used it with brainology. The brainology I have used with Y-Try, and last year I actually got quite good results in a intensive reading class where motivation is an issue. So I found that the brainology in combination with Y-Try did shift them out of that.
All right, excellent. Let's see, any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank Alwyn for a wonderful presentation, and of course the brain development and research on brain as it connects to the kids that we work with, and especially their achievements in various areas is so important. I wish we had more time. Maybe we could get you, Alwyn, to present some more in the future.
I'd love to do
This
that.
is part of the Florida School Counselor Association Professional Development. We've got several other webinars coming up, so look out for them. Of course, we have our 2013 convention starting October 31st, and I hope to see you there. And thank you for participating in today's webinar on behalf of the Florida
Thank
School
you.
Counselor Association.
And I hope people found something helpful in this.
Yep. And we will be putting up your handout and a recording of this webinar as soon as it's available.
Good.
Thank you again, Alwyn.
Bye.